what happens to a person's mind when they spend 90 days inside a steel tube 400 feet below the ocean surface and never once see the sun. This is the USS Wyoming, an Ohio-class ballistic missile submarine. She's 560 feet long, carries 24 nuclear missiles, and costs $9 billion. There are 155 sailors locked inside her hull. They won't surface for 3 months. No phone calls, no fresh air, no daylight, just the mission. And there's one man on board whose job, more than anyone else's, determines whether those 155 people keep their sanity. He's not the captain. He's not the weapons officer. He's the cook. And his story is one you've never heard before. Now I know what you're thinking. A cook on a submarine, how hard can that be? Let me reframe that for you. Imagine cooking breakfast, lunch, and dinner, plus a midnight meal for 155 people every single day for 90 days straight with no days off. Now imagine doing that inside a kitchen the size of your bathroom with no ventilation to the outside in a metal box that's rocking with the current. And here's the part that most people don't think about. The food on a submarine isn't just nutrition, it's the single most important morale factor on the entire boat. Navy psychologists have studied this for decades. When you take away sunlight, fresh air, personal space, communication with your family, food becomes the last thread connecting the crew to the world above. If the food is bad, morale collapses. Arguments break out. Small annoyances become major conflicts. In an enclosed space with nuclear weapons on board, low morale isn't just uncomfortable. It's a national security risk. The Navy knows this. That's why the submarine service has the highest per-person food budget in the entire United States military. They spend more feeding submariners than they do feeding Marines, pilots, or special forces. And they put all of that budget, all of that responsibility, all of that pressure on the shoulders of a culinary specialist, a cook who enlisted right out of high school. Our cook, let's call him Chef, because that's what the crew calls him, is on his second patrol. He's 34 years old. He's got a wife and 2 kids waiting for him in Kings Bay, Georgia. And for the next 90 days, he won't hear their voices. He'll wake up every morning at 4 a.m. in a bunk that's 6 feet long and 2 feet wide. He'll cook for 18 hours. He'll sleep for 5. And he'll do it again, and again, and again, for 3 months. But here's the question that kept me up at night while researching this video. What happens when things go wrong? When the fresh food runs out after week 3 and you've still got 2 months to go? When the freezer breaks? When 155 hungry, sleep-deprived, sunlight-starved sailors are counting on you to give them the one good thing in their day? And you can't, what does that do to a man? But we'll get to that crisis. First, let me walk you through what a normal day looks like for Chef on the USS Wyoming. And trust me, even normal down here is anything but. 0400, the alarm goes off. But there's no sunrise to tell you it's morning, no window, no bird song, just the same fluorescent lights and the same hum of the reactor that never ever stops. He pulls on his coveralls, splashes water on his face from a sink the size of a cereal bowl, and makes his way through the boat to the galley, a journey of about 40 steps. The galley on an Ohio-class submarine is roughly 12 feet by 8 feet. That's smaller than most American kitchens. And in this space, Chef and his 3-man team will produce over 600 individual meals today. Breakfast starts at 0600 sharp. Chef has 2 hours to prepare it. The menu today: scrambled eggs, bacon, hash browns, biscuits and gravy, and fresh fruit while it lasts. Now, cooking on a submarine has challenges you'd never think about on land. First, fire. On a submarine, fire is the second deadliest emergency after flooding. A grease fire in the galley could fill the boat with toxic smoke in minutes. Every surface, every procedure, every movement in that kitchen is designed to prevent fire. Chef doesn't just cook, he manages a controlled hazard zone. Second challenge, space. There's no walk-in pantry. Storage is spread across multiple compartments throughout the boat. Getting ingredients means navigating through the submarine, past the torpedo room, past the missile compartment. Third, Supplies are finite. There's no grocery store, no delivery truck. What you loaded before departure is all you have. And chef has to plan every single meal for 90 days in advance before the boat even leaves port. That means he wrote a menu, 360 meals, and before they submerged, he calculated portions down to the ounce. And he built in contingency plans for when things go wrong, because on a submarine, something always goes wrong. 600. Breakfast is served. The mess hall fills up fast. Sailors file in, grab their trays, and sit down. Chef watches from the serving line. He's reading the room. This is the part of his job that no training manual covers. A good submarine cook isn't just feeding bodies. He's reading the emotional temperature of the crew. He can tell how the boat is doing by how they eat. If guys are wolfing down food and asking for more, morale is good. If they're picking at their plates and leaving early, something's wrong. And chef will adjust. Maybe tomorrow he'll make their favorite, surf and turf night. By 0700, breakfast is done. The mess hall empties. Chef and his team clear the trays, scrub down the galley, and immediately start prepping lunch. There's no break. There's no downtime. The next meal is always 5 hours away. Lunch, dinner, mid-rats. That's the midnight meal for the night watch crew. 4 meals every day. By the time chef falls into his bunk around midnight, he's been on his feet for 20 hours. He sleeps for 4 hours, then the alarm goes off again. Euro 400, same fluorescent light, same hum, same 40 steps to the galley. Day 2 of 90. And this is where it starts to get to you. Not the cooking, not the workload, the sameness, the absolute crushing sameness of every single day. Submariners have a term for it, the blur. After about 3 weeks, the days lose their edges. Monday feels like Thursday feels like Saturday. Your brain stops distinguishing one day from the next because there are no external cues, no sunrise, no weather, no change in light. Navy research has shown that submariners' circadian rhythms, the internal body clock that tells you when to sleep and when to wake, become severely disrupted within the first 2 weeks of a patrol. Some men's sleep cycles shift by hours. And chef, he's one of the worst affected because his schedule is the most extreme on the boat. 4 hours of sleep, 20 hours of work, every single day. By week 4, he's running on autopilot. His hands know the recipes, his body knows the motions, but his mind is somewhere else. And it's at exactly this point, week 4, day 27, when chef gets the report that changes everything. The number 2 freezer has failed, overnight, silently, and everything inside it has thawed. 600 pounds of protein, gone. That's 3 weeks of planned meals, destroyed. They're on day 27 of a 90-day patrol. They have 63 days left, and they just lost a third of their meat supply. There's no resupply, no port to pull into, no helicopter drop at 400 feet. Everything chef needs to feed 155 people for 2 more months is already on this boat, and a massive chunk of it just rotted. Chef locks himself in the dry storage compartment with his meal plan. He has to recalculate everything. 63 days of meals for 155 people with a third less protein. The math is brutal. But the real problem isn't the math. It's what happens when 155 sailors find out that the food they were counting on, the steaks, the good meals, the one thing keeping them going, just disappeared. Chef stood at the serving line that night and watched it happen. The smiles disappeared. The conversations got quieter. One sailor looked at his tray, looked at chef, and said 5 words that cut deeper than any insult. This isn't what we were promised. And chef knew in that moment that the next 63 days were going to be the hardest of his life. But to understand how chef handled what came next, you need to understand where he came from, because nobody grows up dreaming of being a cook on a submarine. Chef grew up in Houma, Louisiana. His grandmother ran a small restaurant, the kind of place where the menu changed every day based on what was fresh and what the regulars wanted. No written recipes, everything from memory. He spent every afternoon after school in that kitchen. She taught him to cook by feel, not by measurements, but by taste, by smell, by the sound of a sizzle. When she passed away, he was 16. He dropped out of school. He drifted. Without her kitchen, he didn't know where he belonged. A Navy recruiter found him working at a gas station at 19, asked him if he had any skills. He said, "I can cook." The recruiter said, "We need cooks." And just like that, he had a direction again. He graduated top of his class at the Navy Culinary Specialist School in San Antonio. His instructors said he had something they couldn't teach: instinct. He didn't just follow recipes, he understood food the way a musician understands melody. He volunteered for submarine duty. Most cooks avoid it. The conditions are brutal, the hours are inhumane, and you're cut off from the world. But Chef saw something different. He said, and I'll quote him here, "On a submarine, the cook matters. On a carrier with 5,000 people, you're invisible. On a sub, everyone knows your name. Everyone depends on you. I want it to matter." And he did matter. On his first patrol, the captain told him something that every submarine cook remembers. "You are the morale officer of this boat. Not officially, but actually, more than anyone else on board, you determine how this crew feels." That first patrol was a revelation. He watched how food changed the entire atmosphere of the boat. A good meal could turn a tense day into a tolerable one. A great meal could make 155 trapped men actually laugh. But then came the hard lesson. 3 weeks into that first patrol, he served a meal that didn't come together. The chicken was dry, the rice was mushy. Small mistakes. In any restaurant, it would be forgettable. The mood on the boat shifted overnight. Small arguments, shorter tempers. A fight nearly broke out in the berthing area. Over nothing. Over everything. And Chef realized he didn't just have a job. He had a responsibility that went far beyond food. He was the difference between a functioning crew and a pressure cooker of 155 stressed, isolated, sleep-deprived people about to blow. From that day on, he never cooked a careless meal again. Every plate was intentional. Every menu was designed not just for nutrition, but for psychology. He learned that on day 45, exactly the halfway point, the crew hits their lowest morale. Every submarine cook knows this. It's called the midpoint wall. You're as far from home as you'll ever be. And Chef's answer to the midpoint wall was something his grandmother taught him. When life gets hard, you cook people something special. You remind them that someone cares. On day 45, every patrol, Chef makes his grandmother's pecan pie, from scratch, on a submarine, with military-issue ingredients that were never meant to make something this good. And every time, every single time, the mess hall changes that night. Men who haven't smiled in weeks take one bite and something shifts. The boat gets a little lighter. The walls feel a little less close. His wife, back in Kings Bay, knows about the pie. She told an interviewer once, "He talks about those moments more than anything. Not the medals, not the commendations. The pie. That's what matters to him." But here's what she also said, the part that's harder to hear. "I lose him for 3 months at a time. No phone calls, no texts. A letter maybe once every few weeks, delivered by supply submarine, if we're lucky." And right now, on day 27, with the freezer crisis unfolding and 63 days to go, Chef can't call her. He can't tell anyone on the surface what's happening. He's on his own, and the entire crew is about to find out just how bad things are going to get. Okay, day 27. Freezer 2 is down. 600 pounds of protein destroyed. Chef has to feed 155 people for 63 more days with roughly 2/3 of his planned supplies. Here's how he did it. First, he reorganized everything. He and his team spent 6 hours doing a complete inventory of every remaining food item on the boat, every can, every bag of rice, every frozen item in the one working freezer. Then he did something clever. He restructured the meal plan to front-load the remaining perishable items and backload the preserved foods. Steaks this week, canned chili by month 3. Give them the good stuff now, while morale still holds. But the real test wasn't the planning, it was the execution. Because now Chef had to make meals that looked and tasted good enough to maintain morale, with significantly less to work with. This is where his grandmother's training kicked in. Southern cooking, at its core, is about making something delicious from almost nothing. Beans, rice, scraps of meat, a handful of spices. Chef's grandmother never had a big budget. She had skill, and that's exactly what he needed now. And it worked. The first reformed meal, a Cajun red beans and rice with homemade cornbread, hit the mess hall, and Chef held his breath. Silence for a moment. Then one sailor said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Chef, this is the best thing you've ever made?" The mess hall erupted. For the next 3 weeks, Chef ran his kitchen like a jazz musician. He improvised every day. The menu was alive, shifting based on what was available, what the crew needed emotionally, and what combinations he could invent from shrinking supplies. He started a request box, a cardboard box outside the galley where sailors could write what they were craving. Most requests were impossible, but Chef would find a way to get close. A sailor wanted pizza. Chef made flatbread with tomato sauce and powdered cheese. Close enough. The gesture mattered more than the accuracy. By day 50, the freezer crisis was almost forgotten. Not because the problem was solved, they were still rationing, but because Chef had turned limitation into creativity. The meals weren't what they were supposed to be. They were better. The captain called Chef to his stateroom. Privately, he shook his hand and said, "You saved this patrol. Not the reactor, not the missiles. You." The crew doesn't know how close we came to a real morale crisis, but I do, and I won't forget it. But the patrol wasn't over. They had 40 days left, and Chef was exhausted, not physically. He'd been running on fumes for a month, mentally, creatively, emotionally. This is the part of submarine service that nobody sees, the accumulated exhaustion that builds day after day with no relief, no weekend, no vacation day, no sunset to mark the end of a long shift. He started making mistakes, small ones, oversalting a soup, forgetting to start the rice, things that would be nothing on the surface, but that ripple through a submarine crew like tremors before an earthquake. And then came day 67. The day Chef almost broke. He woke up and couldn't remember what day it was. Not just the date, he couldn't remember how long he'd been underwater. Was it week 6, week 8? He genuinely didn't know. He sat in the galley that morning at 0400 and did something he'd never done before. Nothing. He just sat there. His team found him at 0430, sitting in the dark, staring at the grill. His second in command, a young guy named Reeves, 22 years old, did something remarkable. He said, "Chef, go back to your rack. I got this. We got this." Chef slept for 12 hours straight, the longest he'd slept in over 2 months. And when he woke up, there was a tray of food next to his bunk. His team had cooked for him. He told me later, and this is the moment in the interview where he got emotional. "That was the best meal I ever had. Not because of the food, because someone took care of me. And I realized I'd forgotten what that felt like." He went back to the galley the next morning. 4 a.m., same alarm, same corridor, but something had shifted. The weight was still there, but it was shared now. His team stood a little taller. They'd proven something to themselves. The final 23 days were still hard. The food supplies dwindled down to the bare essentials. By day 85, Chef was making meals almost entirely from canned goods and dry stores. But he made every single one of those meals count. The last week, he served a different theme every night. Italian night, Mexican night, breakfast for dinner night. It was a countdown, a way to mark time, to give the crew something to look forward to when the calendar was almost done. And then, on day 89, the night before they were scheduled to surface, Chef made one last thing. Pecan pie, again, not for the midpoint, for the finish line. The mess hall was packed. Every sailor on the boat showed up, not just for the pie, for Chef. They knew what he'd been through. They didn't know all the details, the breakdown, the freezer crisis math, the nights on the floor, but they knew he'd kept them fed, kept them sane, kept them together for 90 days. When they asked him to say something, he kept it short. He said, "My grandmother always told me, you can tell how much someone loves you by how they feed you." He paused. "I hope you felt it." Day 90, 0600, for the first time in 3 months, a new order comes over the intercom. prepared a surface, and Chef, exhausted, depleted, changed, felt something he hadn't felt in 90 days, the warmth of anticipation. Sunlight was 20 minutes away. The hatch opened, and for the first time in 90 days, fresh air hit Chef's face, real air, with salt and wind and the smell of the ocean under open sky. He stood on the sail, the top of the submarine, and just looked at the horizon. He hadn't seen a horizon in 3 months. The sheer openness of it, after 90 days of steel walls and 6-foot ceilings, was almost unbearable. He said later that he cried, not dramatically, just quietly, tears running down his face while he stared at the sun. "I forgot how warm it was," he said. "You forget what warmth feels like." 24 hours later, the USS Wyoming pulled into Kings Bay Naval Submarine Base, and there on the pier, standing exactly where she'd stood 90 days ago when she watched the boat leave, was his wife and his 2 kids, who looked like they'd grown 2 inches since he left. His daughter, who was 5, looked up at him and said, "Daddy, you smell like metal." He laughed, the first real, full laugh in 3 months. That night at home, his wife had prepared his favorite meal, but Chef walked into the kitchen, gently moved her aside, and cooked dinner himself. Because for the first time in 90 days, he got to cook for love, not duty, for 4 people, not 155, in a kitchen with windows and sunlight. He made red beans and rice, his grandmother's recipe, the same dish that saved morale on day 28. But tonight, he added fresh vegetables, fresh herbs from the garden, ingredients he dreamed about for 3 months. The family sat down, no fluorescent lights, no steel walls, no reactor hum, just candlelight, laughter, and a meal made with love in a kitchen that had windows. His wife asked him how the patrol was. He smiled and said, "Good. The food was good." That's all he said. That's all he could say. 3 months compressed into 5 words. The rest she understood without asking. 6 weeks later, he reported back for his next patrol. Same submarine, same galley, same 4 a.m. alarm, because that's the life he chose. And he'll do it again. And again, because 155 people need him. Chef's grandmother once told him, "The secret ingredient isn't spice, it's giving a damn." 90 days without sunlight, 55,000 meals, 1 broken freezer, and a cook who refused to let his crew feel forgotten. That's not just cooking, that's love in a steel tube, 400 feet below the surface of the sea. If you made it this far, thank you. If you want more stories like this about the people behind the machines, subscribe. It makes a real difference. I'll see you in the next one.